So we are going to be comparing the classic Lexicon 480L and 224 to modern reverbs, the Bricasti M7 and Cinematic Rooms. We're going to listen to them on various sources and see whether or not the classic older reverbs still stand up against modern reverbs that have so much more processing power. Do the old reverbs stand up next to them? Do they still have any relevance today? Do they bring something to the table that the modern reverbs don't, and vice versa? We're going to listen to it and we're going to hear the difference. The Lexicon 224, those were two really famous reverbs that pretty much dominated studios throughout the 80s and 90s, and they sounded great in their day, and they still sound great now. But a lot of progress has been made, and that's largely because of the processing power that's now available in a modern computer or a modern piece of hardware is orders of magnitude greater than what was available back in the 1980s to build a reverb. They had a tiny amount of memory that they could use in there on these chips that they had in those days, tiny amount of processing power available. Now you've got, vast amounts more processing power and memory, so you can make far more complex and realistic sounding spaces, things which sound a lot more like a real space and create more of a sense of space and depth. Which isn't to say that the older reverbs aren't really great still. They are, but they have certain uses now which are different than what they used to be. And we're going to have a listen to those. So we're going to have a look at four reverbs. We've got the 480, the Lexicon 480, and this is software, but it is a 100% accurate, like down to the sample accurate of a real 480 Lexicon 480L reverb. And then we've got a emulation of a Lexicon 224. 224 was an earlier one, very late 70s, early 80s, and then in the late 80s the 480 came out. And then we've got some modern reverbs here, which are also legendary in their own right. You're going to hear the difference between them. So we've got the Seventh Heaven, which is based on the Bricasti M7, and it's a very accurate sampling of that reverb. So it's not an emulation, it's a sampling of the reverb, many multi-samples, so it's really, really accurate to the real sound of it. We've now also got the Cinematic Rooms, and this is an algorithmic reverb. It's not emulating anything, it's just a modern algorithmic reverb that is very popular for use in films and music studios, and it's just a very capable modern reverb. So we're going to listen to some sax on its own and listen to these one at a time. Let's start with the 224. Let's listen to the sax with that on it. Creating these videos takes significant time and effort. Supporters of the channel make it possible for me to continue to make more. If you find these videos useful and interesting, I invite you to support the channel. There are a range of things you can do. You can make a direct donation of any amount, become a monthly patron, buy some of my music, or buy some merchandise. I also have a range of courses available that cover all essential aspects of mixing, from getting started right up to advanced techniques. Links to everything are in the video description below. And finally, click that like and subscribe button. Thanks. I've set the reverb time on all of these to round about the same, about 101.8 seconds. So you can hear it's quite thick sounding. It doesn't give a great sense of a room or space. You get some sense of space, but I couldn't tell you what size the room was that sax was sitting in. So listen again from that perspective. So it sounds like there's something back there behind it, but I can't hear like a size of a room specifically or get a picture of, the size and shape of the room. It doesn't really sound like a real space, but it isn't to say it doesn't sound good. It does sound really nice, but it's more of a thickening effect. It kind of resonates with the sax and could complement it, but it's also quite thick, so could easily turn into a wash if you had lots of this going on in the mix on lots of instruments. So you'd have to be quite careful about it. Good in a sparse setting. I wouldn't use it on lots of instruments in a mix because I think you'd end up with too much density and too much wash. But it does have a specific sound to it, which can be really nice for particularly reinforcing the sound of an instrument. I don't think this sax needs that at all, but a vocal that needed some reinforcing could be a really good call for that. Let's now listen to the 480, which is the next generation of Lexicon. Well, not the next one, but a later generation. So much more of a sense of space now, because it's got more of a bigger memory than the 224, more sophisticated chips, more sophisticated algorithms because it had more processing power. And you can hear more of a sense of space. I still can't really hear the size of that room in my mind. I can't kind of see it opening up behind the speakers as a space. And it's still kind of quite thick and sitting behind that sax and kind of, again, in a nice way, enhancing it and reinforcing it, but it is back behind it and it could create a wash if there was too much of it in a mix. Less so than the 224. But still, you'd have to be a little bit careful, and if I put too long of a reverb from the 480 on everything in a mix, it would end up being quite washy and could create mud. But keep the reverbs a bit shorter, maybe longer, just on one instrument that you were featuring. It could sound nice. In a more sparse setting, you could get away with longer tails and things. But just keep in mind, it's a generation forward, but there's a limit to how real the space is going to sound and how much it's going to kind of stay out of the way of instruments, which isn't necessarily a criticism, because sometimes, as I said, you want to reinforce an instrument and have something sitting behind it to reinforce the tone. Again, with this sax, it doesn't need it, but with a vocal that needed a bit of reinforcement, or a guitar that needed a bit of drama going on behind it, this could be a good choice. Let's move over now to the Bricasti. This is another legendary hardware. Have a listen to this one. So now I can hear exactly the size of the room. I can just see it open up behind the speakers. I know exactly how big it is, how wide it is, how deep it is. It sounds way more realistic, and it stays out of the way of the sax. It's not sitting behind it and kind of reinforcing it in the way that the Lexicons did. It enhances it, definitely, but it's not going to cloud your mix. Because it stays out of the way. It creates a space and opens out behind rather than sitting with the sound like the Lexicons or any older reverb will do. Again, if you needed to reinforce something or you wanted the reverb to be a distinct effect that's sustained to create drama or something, this reverb wouldn't be my reverb of choice. It would be a Lexicon or something like that. But if I want a real space, if I want to open out 3D depth in a mix, the Bricasti just does it out of the box. It's amazing for that. And it's because the processing power is so much greater than the Lexicons had at the time. So it can be far more complex and realistic sounding, and the programming in it is second to none. So, which the Lexicons were at the time as well. So I'm not in any way criticizing them. They were amazing what they managed to do with the hardware that was available at the time, just incredibly amazing. But with the hardware now, the M7, the Bricasti M7 is equally amazing within the hardware that we have now. So you can hear the difference. So in a mix, I would use something like a Bricasti, a modern reverb, to create that sense of space and depth. Without creating mud or wash or anything like that. And I might use a Lexicon or something similar to that to create an effect or to thicken up a sound. But I wouldn't try to use it to create a sense of space or depth, because there's just much better options now in these modern reverbs. So let's have a listen now to another modern one, the Cinematic Rooms. So again, it really opens out of space. I can kind of hear the real size of the room, stays out of the way. Very different from the Seventh Heaven. Doesn't enhance it as much. It doesn't have that lushness that the Bricasti has, but sometimes it's a little cooler and less rich, but sometimes that's what you need. Sometimes you want something, if you've already got some richness going on there, maybe from a Bricasti, and you just need a little bit more space on another instrument, but you don't want to add any more richness because it doesn't suit the instrument or the mix already has enough of that. Cinematic rooms can be a really good way of giving you something that creates a real space, but is a little cooler and a little less kind of rich, but nonetheless very realistic sounding. So I'll just give you another example of one, another modern one. Let's try this one here from Melda. So this is another one. Let's have a listen to this one. So again, real sense of a space back there. You can kind of hear the size of the space. But the quality, again, is really different from either the Bricasti or the cinematic rooms. It's less cool than the cinematic rooms. It doesn't have that, you know, it's warmer in a way, but it's not rich like the Bricasti is. But it's different. And again, it's another option you've got. And there are others out there. The Sonstig Reve is another one I would recommend as being a really good modern sounding reverb. So these reverbs all have their different place for different effects. But it's worth understanding that the modern reverbs, the older reverbs just can't compete with the modern ones in terms of realism and in terms of opening out depth and staying out of the way of the mix. In other words, not creating mud in the mix. These modern reverbs are really great at not muddying up your mix. But because they stay out of the way, if you need something to reinforce something, like a vocal needs thickening, or you need something where you need some, like an effect, like some drama, you need to kind of really hear that reverb tail soar off after, you know, a vocal or a guitar or something, then these modern reverbs, at least the ones I've shown you here, aren't really going to do that for you for the very fact that they sound very realistic. There are some modern reverbs that will do that as well, but I often like to use these older ones because they're quite smeary and quite dense, but that thickening that causes can actually be a good thing if you want a reverb that is a kind of a soaring effect on something, or to thicken something up. It has a very nice plate sound, which is not a real plate. It doesn't sound really exactly like a real plate, but it has that density and a uniqueness to the particular Lexicon reverb that has been used many times in the same kind of way you'd use a plate to reinforce. So I'm going to use this plate setting here, have a listen to that on the vocals and see how it sounds in terms of reinforcing that vocal. I'm going to start with no reverb, and then I'm going to bring this reverb in.
Reach out to me, other eyes, other arms, reach out to me.
So you hear how that really nicely thickens up and reinforces the vocal in a way that a modern reverb that stays right out of the way of the vocal wouldn't do. So this is something that these older reverbs are kind of uniquely good at doing, I find. Now, in contrast, let's listen to a modern reverb, the Cinematic Rooms from Liquid Sonics, on this vocal.
Other arms, reach out to me.
Now, although this reverb, the Cinematic Rooms, creates a much more sense of a real space, you can kind of almost see the size of the space and the type of space it's creating, it doesn't thicken and reinforce the vocals in the same way that the Lexicon 480L does. So let's have a listen to another variation on this.
Other arms, reach out to me, other eyes.
And again, you can hear it seems to kind of almost meld in with the vocal. Because it's not creating such a space around it, it's sitting more right behind it. It's reinforcing that vocal. It's kind of like almost recirculating the tone of the vocal in a more diffuse way, which thickens it and reinforces it. So these older vintage reverbs are great at doing that. And that's normally what I use them for.